It was a calm morning in Batam, Indonesia, when huge pieces of metal suddenly fell from the sky, crashing through rooftops. Residents quickly realized that something serious had happened. Just a few thousand feet above, the world's largest passenger plane was in crisis. An Airbus A380, carrying more than 400 passengers, had suffered an engine explosion. The blast damaged several critical systems, leaving only one engine functioning normally and struggling to keep the aircraft in the air. As more warning messages appeared, showing fuel leaks and flight control problems, the situation became increasingly urgent. If the crew returned immediately, the plane might lose control before landing. But if they stayed in the air longer to test the systems and ensure the plane's functions were stable, they risked running out of fuel before returning safely. This is the story of Qantas Flight 32. On the morning of November 4, 2010, a Qantas Airbus A380 was preparing for takeoff at Singapore's Changi International Airport. On board were 440 passengers, 24 cabin crew members, and a flight crew of 5 pilots. The captain, Richard de Crespigny, was a former military pilot with over 15,000 flight hours. The first officer, Matt Hicks, had 11,000 flight hours, while the second officer, Mark Johnson, had accumulated 8,000 flight hours. The second officer's role was to relieve the other pilots during long flights so they could rest. Although long-haul flights normally have only 3 pilots, today there were 5 because the captain was undergoing his routine annual route check, a standard Qantas procedure. Another captain, Harry Wubben, was on board for training to become a check captain, with 20,000 flight hours, and he was being supervised by senior check captain David Evans, who had more than 17,000 hours of experience. Together, these pilots had over 70,000 hours of total flight experience. An incredibly skilled and seasoned team, more than capable of handling the world's largest passenger jet. At 9:56 a.m. local time, Qantas Flight 32 took off from runway 20C at Changi Airport. Everything seemed normal in the cockpit. There were no signs of the impending crisis. But just 5 minutes after takeoff, as the plane climbed to 7,000 feet, the crew heard 2 loud bangs from the left side. The aircraft veered left, a clear sign that one of the engines had failed. The Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitoring (ECAM) system immediately displayed a warning showing that engine number 2's turbine was overheating. The captain leveled the aircraft to assess the situation, setting the autopilot to maintain 7,400 feet at 250 knots. However, he soon noticed that the autothrottle system was no longer functioning, another sign of failure that made handling the problem even more difficult. After confirming that the aircraft was still stable and under control, the captain instructed the co-pilot to start going through the ECAM checklist one by one. For the engine overheat warning, the checklist required the crew to set engine 2's thrust lever to idle and monitor it for 30 seconds. They followed the procedure and decided to issue a PAN emergency call to air traffic control. Unlike Mayday, which indicates an immediate life-threatening emergency, PAN signals a serious problem that isn't yet life-threatening but requires assistance. The captain's final words, "Stand by for instructions," meant he was asking the tower not to contact them so the crew could focus on the emergency tasks. This was a textbook example of the aviate, navigate, communicate principle drilled into pilots during early training. Seconds later, another ECAM alert appeared, Engine 2 fire warning, but it disappeared after 3 seconds. Combined with the earlier overheat message, the crew suspected that an internal fire might be burning inside the engine. They decided to shut down Engine 2 and activate the built-in fire extinguishers. But when they tried twice to discharge the first fire bottle, nothing happened. Confused, They attempted the second fire bottle, but even after multiple tries, they couldn't confirm that either had been released. After a brief discussion, the crew decided to proceed with the standard in-flight engine failure checklist and began transferring fuel from Engine 2. Checking the engine display, they confirmed that Engine 2 was completely failed, while Engines 1 and 4 were in degraded mode, and Engine 3 was in alternate mode. These modes meant that the flight control computers weren't receiving all critical data from those engines. Although they still provided thrust, they now required manual control because the aircraft's automated systems couldn't fully manage them anymore. Inside the cabin, passengers and crew on the left side could clearly see damage to the wing and fuel leaking from the tanks. One passenger even noticed a small flame inside the wing. Fear and panic began to spread throughout the cabin as people prepared for the worst. The cabin crew tried to contact the cockpit using the emergency interphone system to report what they saw, but there was no response. The pilots were overwhelmed by the flood of warning messages: flight control, fuel, electrical, braking, and hydraulic system alerts all appearing at once. Out of the aircraft's 22 major systems, 21 were showing faults, a nightmare scenario for any pilot. The captain realized this was far beyond any normal single-engine failure situation. It was a full-scale flight emergency. Although they still didn't know the exact cause, the crew needed to decide whether to attempt an immediate landing or continue troubleshooting the systems mid-air. The first major decision of the flight. If the flight control system was too damaged, attempting a landing could end in disaster. But staying airborne with a fuel leak risked further engine loss or even an uncontrollable situation. After careful discussion, the pilots concluded that the aircraft was still controllable and had enough fuel to stay in the air for a while longer, allowing them to handle the warnings and complete the necessary checklists. The captain then made an announcement to passengers, reassuring them and keeping the cabin calm. The co-pilot informed air traffic control of their decision and requested a holding pattern near Singapore. Qantas Flight 32 began flying an oval-shaped holding pattern about 20 nautical miles east of Changi Airport. Meanwhile, air traffic control informed the crew that debris from their aircraft had been found on the ground. Pieces of the engine's turbine disc had landed on houses and streets in Batam, Indonesia. Fortunately, no one on the ground was injured. However, as news of falling debris spread rapidly worldwide, no official statement had yet been released. With so little confirmed information, rumors even circulated that a Qantas super jumbo jet had crashed over Indonesia.